the bulk of the population of Cambodia today is made up of Khmer, the Khmer people. Now, who are the Khmer? Where did they come from? What are their origins? Well, this is a question that scholars don't agree upon as yet. There's a big surprise. Yeah, some scholars say that the Khmer have been around for 1,500, maybe a couple thousand years in this area. Others say that they've been around for much longer than that. The oldest stone inscriptions, the oldest inscriptions we have, indications of the Khmer language, or at least a language that's clearly an ancestor language to modern Cambodian. These have been found in stone in a place called Angkor. It's about 50 miles south of where I'm standing right now in Phnom Penh. Now, these inscriptions only tell us so much. They tell us that people who were almost certainly the ancestors of today's Khmer lived in the Mekong Delta area in the 600s, probably the late 500s at least, AD. And that's about it. They don't tell us how long they'd been there. Had they been there for many thousands of years? Or had they just recently arrived and started inscribing in stone? We don't know. The inscriptions don't tell us. Certainly there have been people in Southeast Asia, in this part of Southeast Asia, for tens of thousands of years, based on, the evidence that we have today. These are, for the most part, hunter-gatherer types, nomads, semi-nomadic, slash and burn farmers, on the move, Paleolithic peoples. Then around 3000 BC, they begin to take part in the Neolithic revolution, settling down in more permanent communities, practicing agriculture, domesticating animals, and all that stuff. But were these people the ancestors of today's Khmer, of modern Cambodians? Well, that we don't know. And so we return to those stone inscriptions at Angkor, the earliest of which dates to 612 AD, okay, 612. So we're talking the 600s, the 700s. There's still no unified Khmer state. There's no single Khmer polity. Instead, we're dealing with a multiplicity of little petty kingdoms, chieftaincies, so no unified state. In fact, this was a period when the Khmer may have been dominated by outside forces, and in particular, the Srivijayan Empire, the great maritime empire based out of Sumatra. But by the 700s, that empire, or at least the next incarnation of that empire, called the Sailendra Empire, led by the Sailendra dynasty, these guys were based out of Java, and we know that the Sailendras led raids along the coast in the Mekong Delta area. We know that these guys, to a degree, dominated some of these Khmer polities. In fact, they so annoyed one Khmer king, one of these, petty kings, that evidently he complained against the Sailendra ruler, and perhaps in an offhand remark, he wished for the Sailendra ruler's head on a plate. Well, the Sailendra ruler got wind of it, and he sent a force to deal with this guy. The Khmer were beaten, death and destruction were meted out, and the Khmer king's head was cut off, and it was put on a plate. And whatever the truth of this story, it's clear that these Java-based raids were more than a little headache to the Khmer. Well, everything changed in the 700s when a Khmer chief named Jayavarman II unified, or subjugated and conquered, his fellow Khmer polities into one great Khmer state, and he moved its capital from the wet Mekong Delta, an area that was prone to attacks by the Javanese, that was near the Champa state, the Khmer's great traditional enemy. He moved the capital from there eventually to here, to Angkor, the northwest corner of the Tonle Sap, much drier but much further away from all of these threats. Here he built his capital. Here he founded, really, a new state, a new polity. And he set himself up as a Deva Raja, a god king, the first in a line of 600 years of god kings to rule from this area. And Jayavarman II himself would rule for 50 of those years. The ruins of Angkor are the largest on Earth. No other ruins complex is bigger. In fact, no other ruins complex can be seen from space, but Angkor and this vast sprawl, this can be seen from space. So pretty incredible. And equally incredible is this is just a small part of town in terms of Angkor. Angkor was much more vast than just the stone buildings that are left today. In fact, this was just the religious part of town. Okay, the royal part of town, the royal palaces, which are made of wood, those are gone. The neighborhoods, which may have housed over 1 million people, mostly peasants, all gone. So this is just one small part of the vast urban sprawl that was Angkor. And this was a Hindu kingdom, officially, usually a Hindu kingdom, and thus employing an army of Brahmin priests to perform the requisite rituals for the maintenance of the well-being of the empire. And these guys, for hundreds of years, could claim a lineage that, they would claim a lineage that went all the way back, supposedly, to the original priests of Jayavarman II. So it was very interesting. Now, at times, the empire also mixed with Mahayana Buddhism as an official religion. There's sort of a synthesis of the two, and some Khmer tradition and customs. But officially, usually, a Hindu empire. Maybe the most impressive thing about what's built here, though, are the artificial lakes. The artificial lakes, these massive reservoirs, there were at least 4, miles long each. Huge, 10 feet tall walls filled with water for miles and miles, surrounding the main temple complex. Now, for a while, it was, speculated that these things had only religious significance. They only served religious functions. See, these were symbolic of the great seas and oceans surrounding the world. Meanwhile, the temples themselves were symbolic. You have the temple walls symbolizing the Himalayas, and then you have the temple structures themselves symbolizing specific mountains. And in particular, you'll see the tall mountain-like structure in the middle of almost all of these temple complexes. They're all conical, like mountains. At the center, Mount Meru, the center of the universe. This is a Hindu cosmology being laid out in architecture and landscape design, a Hindu cosmology. But the latest evidence shows, and this is controversial, but the latest evidence shows that these artificial lakes, these vast artificial lakes, did indeed serve a practical purpose, and that they were connected to a vast network of canals that watered the fields and served other, irrigating purposes for between 1 and perhaps 2 million people. Now, the Deva Rajas ruled over a multiplicity of peoples, not just Khmer, over a vast territory. But their power was probably no more evident than right here. You have these complexes built by who knows how many people, hundreds of thousands, maybe more. Most forced corvée labor, or slaves, straight up slaves. This was a heavy slave society. That's who built these edifices, but could they walk through the halls? Could they walk in the courtyards here? No. This was reserved for the religious class and for the god king himself. That's it. Who knows how many tens of thousands or more died building this thing, and crushed by, stones suspended by ropes, or dying of heat stroke, dragging the stones from the quarry 30 miles away by, human muscle. So definitely the hierarchy on display in the very building of this network of complexes. As for the peasants, they were strictly regulated in case they ever got the idea to take on heirs, the heirs of nobility. So in their dress, they were regulated. They had to wear simple dress. No luxurious dress for them, lest they think they're the nobility. Even the type of roof that they were allowed to have was regulated. They could not have tiles on their roof, for example. Only the nobility could have tiles on their roof. When the king procession came by on the street, king on his elephant with his sword, they couldn't really look. They had to grovel on the ground with their foreheads in the dirt or suffer arrest. So this was definitely a very strictly hierarchical society. Well, if you come to Cambodia today, you may notice that the dominant faith system is Theravada Buddhism. Now, Theravada Buddhism is going to show up from the 1200s on, really going to experience mass conversions until it becomes the dominant faith system in Cambodia. And you can see how Theravada Buddhism might work to undermine the hierarchy that I've just been talking about, the hierarchy of the empire, the absolute power of the monarch. See, Theravada Buddhism is a lot more individual. It's a lot less dependent upon, for example, a hereditary priestly class. Anyone could be a monk, worthy of emulation. And really, righteousness involved good works. Simple life, good works to earn good karma. So you can see how this might undermine a strictly hierarchical society with an absolute monarch. From the 1200s to the late 1500s, a series of very devastating wars, very bloody wars, racked this region of Southeast Asia. And in particular for the Khmer, the Thai-speaking peoples to the west, these are peoples, this is territory that the Khmer had controlled for a very long time. These guys rose up with their capital at Ayutthaya and invaded Angkor, sacked the city. This is 1431. And Angkor subsequently was abandoned by the Khmer Empire. Now this date is often, this 1431 date, is often listed as this is the end of the Khmer Empire. Well, the truth is the Khmer Empire continued. It lived on. It just moved its capital east to the Mekong Delta and lived on, but it never came close to recapturing its old territorial and martial glory. So maybe the Siamese invasions and this period of warfare and the rise of the Khmer Empire's neighbors, particularly the Siamese, and also to the east, a very aggressive and very expansive Vietnamese state that was taking over, based in the north, but taking over all of what today is Vietnam and beyond. Maybe the aggression of these neighbors combined with that gentle subversion from Theravada Buddhism, perhaps, that we've discussed, certainly the heavy extractions of wealth by the Devarajas of their people in order to build all of these grand structures, as well as combined with your typical political internal squabbles and possibly some environmental degradation. All this comes together, perhaps, to help explain the long decline and fall of the Khmer Empire. And by the time the French set up their protectorate here in the 1860s, only a handful of Buddhist monks still lived in these ruins. The rest had been swallowed up by the jungle. And in a way, the same thing was threatening the Khmer people at the time. The aggressive neighbors of this Khmer-dominated population, the Siamese and the Vietnamese, threatened the very existence of any sort of Khmer polity, possibly Khmer culture. And ironically, it was the presence of the colonial French, it was the setting up of a French protectorate here that probably saved the Khmer as a people. When the French, were finally booted out, there was a Cambodia left behind. That may not have been the case had 150 years or so of absorption in Vietnamese and Siamese culture taken place in a Vietnamese and Siamese polity. So sort of an interesting twist, maybe a little bit of a silver lining to an otherwise colonial experience. Unfortunately for the Khmer, though, really the worst was yet to come. But that's another story.